Hello, Mr. Michael. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks yourself.
Yeah, we are very happy to have you today. And Luisa, can you help me to guide for the program?
Hi there.
Can you turn on the mic, Luisa?
Hello, hello, Mr. Michael.
Hi,
I hope
Lisa.
you're
How are
happy.
you?
I'm very great.
Good, good.
Yeah,
Looking forward to the
pleased to
event.
be your host today.
Perfect.
I'm ready to turn on the mic. So, shall we start now?
Yep, I'm ready when you are. Let me know when. Yeah, because I can share the screen, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you probably can share the screen and you share to the audience as well.
Okay.
Okay, so start. A very good day to everyone and warmly welcome to Hacking Your Performance series of Young Entrepreneur Forum. My name is Louisa and I can't be more humbled and honored to be serving as your host for today's event. First up, I would like to deliver my patient and warm greetings to all of you and thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to join us today. And this is our welcome to Young Entrepreneur Forums as well, hosted at Zoom applications and Facebook. So ladies and gentlemen, following the great success of the last event, Young Entrepreneur Forums has successfully delivered tasks that impacted on young people who would like to unleash their potential. And today, we'll meet Mr. Michael. He serves as a managing partner and co-founder of Singapore-based venture capital firm, Cocoon Capital. So set up alongside Will Klippgen in 2016, Cocoon adopts a hands-on, founder-first approach to early-stage investing. Before this, Michael was an entrepreneur, and since 2000, was a full-time angel investor who was named UK Angel Investor of the Year 2015, selected as one of the Maserati 100, and classified as a business angel you should know. And everyone, please welcome Mr. Michael to have an awesome discussion with us today. So Michael,
Thank you
it's your
very much.
turn.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me. I look forward to talking to you all further and hopefully taking questions at the end. What I will do is I will quickly share my screen. Hopefully I can get this to work. Can you all see my screen? Let's go to the...
Yeah, very clear.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me. Today I've been asked to talk for roughly an hour and to how to raise seed funding. I'm very much focusing because I've made the assumption that for many of you, you either are starting your entrepreneurial journey now or are thinking of starting your entrepreneurial journey. So seed funding is normally the first money that you actually raise to actually start your business. Many of the principles that I'm going to talk to you about today are ones that will be used throughout your fundraising processes all the way to exit. But I will specifically start looking at the seed rounds for now. So literally, I'm just going to do a little bit of introduction about what is fundraising, how to prepare to fundraise, preparing your financials, and talking a little bit about the deck and the other information that you'll require to raise funding when you go out and talk to investors. As Louisa has already very kindly done, she has kindly introduced me already, so much of this you already know. I think just to give a little bit more about Cocoon Capital. So we're an early stage seed fund, which means that on the whole, our focus is on investing in pre or very early stage revenue companies. We invest anywhere up to $1 million into the companies. We're active investors, and we always lead the deal. So by active investor, it means that majority of my time is actually working with founders that we invest in post-investment to help them avoid the basic one-on-one mistakes of building businesses. My background and Will's background was both successful entrepreneurs. And I've been doing this now for over 20 years, and Will has been in the early stage world for over 25 years. So I just want to quickly cover what are the different types of funds that are available to you. There's equity fundraising. So when you're building a business, founders will normally hold 100% of their business. So you'll own all the shares. When you take on equity funding, that means somebody like myself, an investor, will come in and will purchase a number of shares off you. So we'll actually hold equity or your shares within the business. Convertible notes, SAFE, that's literally debt financing. So rather than taking equity directly in the business, I will invest in your company without taking any equity, but on the promissory that I'll have notes or kind of debt on the business that at the next funding round will convert into equity, either a pre-agreed or in a range or at a discount at the next time you raise funding, or next time you'll raise equity funding. There's also debt financing, which is non-equity based, which is when, and you normally take that from banks or other institutions that will lend you money without taking any equity within the business itself. For today's conversation, I'm mostly going to follow or focus on equity funding, but also many early stage investors also take the same approach when they're investing in convertible notes. Convertible notes, SAFE and KISS are all pretty much the same thing with a few changes, but it's basically they're converting into equity at the next round or at some point in the future. So who do you normally go for early stage investing? The most common approach for a lot of people, the first money they take in is normally from friends. We call it the 3 Fs. It's normally friends, family, and fools. That's when you just go and you just get a little bit of money just to give yourself some early traction. Other type of money is angel investors. So that's what I've been for the last 20 years. That's somebody who has got money, been successful in business or however they've got it, and they're not necessarily people that you know beforehand, and they will invest directly into your business. Normally, they'll look to invest anywhere between $25,000 to $500,000 dollars into a business, and they normally invest in multiple businesses. So friends and family, normally you'll be the only people they back into a business. Angel investors normally do it. They normally look to build a portfolio of companies over a period of time. Accelerators and incubators, there's many of them in Vietnam, like Visa. They take you on a 3-month, sometimes 6-month program. They give you a little bit of money to take equity, and they take you through this 3-month program where they'll work with you, help you on your with your business plan. They'll help you on your commercialization, get you to talk to some experts in different parts of the business. And then at the end of it, they'll introduce you to a bunch of investors, normally through a demo day, to see if you can raise further funding from normally from angel investors. all from venture capital. So I now am a venture, I run a VC. So literally all that means is that a group of investors have given me money to invest into startups. So rather than managing the investments themselves, they have me invest on their behalf. In terms of bank and debt financing institutions, I think that is an easy one. But crowdfunding there's a number of crowdfunding sites globally, and that's when you can literally just put a video and a short description of what you're doing on a platform which is connected to a lot of angel investors, both locally and globally, and they can look to invest in your business. Normally there's a minimum amount that you fundraise, that you have to raise before you can actually collect the money from the investors. So your fundraising journey, and again, that the areas covered in green are the ones that I'm really going to focus on, because I think that's where many of you will be at. So you've got the pre-seed. That's where friends and family, angel investors, crowdfunding accelerators are, and then seed, which is just normally at that point in time, because the sums become slightly different, is around angel investors, family offices, and VCs. So what do I mean by pre-seed and seed? And what's the difference, especially when you get up to Series A? So pre-seed, normally what that means, you're at the stage where you have an idea, and that's about it. So you've got, you believe you found the problem statement. You might have talked to some potential customers, but you really haven't built the product yet, and you really haven't got any revenue. So it's very early stage, and normally you'll be looking to raise maybe $100,000, maybe a bit more, a bit less. At the seed round, that's when you've maybe built an MVP. You might not have any revenue still, but you've maybe doing some pilots with some potential customers. You might have even done a first hire, but you're still very, very early stage in the business. And normally at that point in time, you'll be looking to raise about $500,000 to about $1 million. At the Series A, this is where you've got revenue, you've got customers, you've hired a number of people, you've proven that you've got product market fit, and you're looking now to scale the company a lot, either on a country or maybe a regional basis. And that normally you're raising a few $1 million at that point in time. So some things just to keep in mind when you'll hear a lot about fundraising, and I just thought there's just a couple of things that you should think about when you start kind of considering going out. You'll hear a lot of people, and if you do a lot of research online, there's a lot of comments about you should always be in fundraising mode. And I just want to kind of describe and explain a little bit more about what that actually means, because it is actually quite often misunderstood, that phrase. So always be fundraising doesn't necessarily mean that you're always looking to raise funds. As we'll talk about later on in the deck, fundraising, an important part of the fundraising process is actually building relationships with investors. So that literally means that at any point in time, you could run into an investor or a potential investor. And even if you're not raising money at that point in time, it does not mean that you can't pitch to them and say, this is what I'm doing. Is this something that you could be interested in investing in? So it could be, at a conference, or you go to a startup event and there's somebody like Eddie Tai from 500 Startups there. And you're like, okay, this is my chance to actually meet him in person. Let me just quickly kind of pitch to him what I'm doing. You might not have got enough traction from yet, but you should always be looking to build relationships with them, because it's much easier to get people to invest in you if they've known you over a period of time. So always be fundraising means literally you've always got to be prepared to talk to an investor, have your pitch ready, and you never know. You might find sometimes that even though you might not be looking for money, you might talk to an investor who gets so excited about your idea They say, we're not going to actually, you might not need the money until for another 6 months or another 12 months, but we want to invest in you now. Good deals are normally quite competitive. So actually one of my portfolio companies now, literally last month, they'd only recently raised money from us. They were talking to an investor, just building a relationship, just saying, this is what we're doing. The investor got so excited, was like, okay, I'm going to invest in you. I don't care what you say. I just give me this information and let's agree a deal. Because the way they looked at it is that if the company had more money, they could do a lot more, but also they were worried that because the metrics were so good, that if they didn't invest, somebody else would invest in them. But the other thing to also consider is that when you do go out fundraising in a normal circumstance, it is a full-time job. I think a lot of founders in particular at the early stage do not understand how much time it takes them to actually fundraise, how many conversations and how much it takes them out of the business. And quite often the business suffers because the founders are all fundraising. So what you've got to do is, before you go out fundraising, prepare the business to have it that you might not be there all the time. And what that normally means is if you've got a co-founder, only one person does the fundraising. If you've got if you've got somebody, you have people that cover all the roles that you would normally cover, so that the business is not as impacted as it would be if you just suddenly disappear and all of a sudden you're finding that it takes up more time. And you've got to be prepared that it's going to take you out of the business for about 6 months. So these are all things that you need to keep in mind when you go out and you look to do your fundraise. So how do you prepare? What do you need to prepare to go out and raise money from investors? So you might have already raised money from friends and family, who will do it based on their relationship with you. But now you're having to talk to people that you might not have any relationship with, have never met before. So these are some things that you can actually do to actually make sure to massively increase the chances of a successful fundraise. The first thing is, do your research. That sounds like a really obvious one, but do research and about the investors that you want to go after. We are, I would say, about maybe 10 to 20% of the business plans that we receive are not ones that we would ever actually invest in because they fit outside our investment criteria. So for example, I would say we get quite a few that are consumer-focused businesses. We make it very clear on our website, and if you look at the portfolio companies that we've got, we don't invest in consumer-focused businesses. And you reaching out to us, spending time trying to talk to us is just a waste of your time, and your time is precious. So when you go and reach out for investors, try and find ones that are going to be relevant and interested in your business, especially if you're looking at VCs. Go to their websites. On their websites, they always make it very, very clear what they will, what they won't invest in, quite often in terms of what stage they'll invest in. And also it will give you a chance to actually see what they've invested in the past. So have they invested in your sector before? Have they invested in maybe your direct competitor? Because then you might not want to talk to them. But it also means that by doing that, you can also potentially weed out ones that, is not ever going to, if they've never invested in your sector before, if you're doing a fintech and they've never shown any interest in fintech, then you might not have them as somebody that is critical for you to talk to. Check your corporate, in your corporate governance. That means that, there's a lot of stuff that you need to do, and I'll go into a bit more bit more detail in terms of what your data room, why you need it and what you need to have in it. But be prepared that if you do talk to an investor, that if they do show interest, that you can actually then give them all the information they want in the way that they want it. It shows a level of professionalism. What you've got to remember is first impressions count. When you're investing at an early stage, when I'm looking to invest in you, quite often, as I've said earlier, you might not have any revenue. You might not have a customer. So 80–90% of my investment decision is going to be based on the founders. And the more trustworthy that you can show yourself being, and the more organized and the more professional, the greater the chance you are going to have an investor give you their money. Because we normally have to make the decision within 1 or 2 meetings. We might have to decide that we have to give you $500,000. So I think it's really important that every interaction that you have with the investor gives them that air of confidence that they can trust you with their money, and that you will know how to spend it, and that you know how to actually scale your business. Figure out, I get a lot of companies reach out to me that are looking for Series A funding whilst we're a seed investor. So look again at, are you pitching to the right people? Are you wasting your time? A lot of VCs will listen to a pitch if they like what it sounds, because they might want to do market research, but they might not have any interest in actually investing in you just because you don't fit within their investment criteria. Again, keep your deck and financials up to date. You'll receive a lot of feedback, which we'll come to later in terms of your deck and financials. For a lot of you, it will be the first time fundraising and the first time putting financial forecasts together and showing it to an investor. So quite often you'll receive a lot of feedback through the process. So you've got to always be keeping them up to date and updating them based on that feedback, because obviously it shows, it will increase your chance of converting one of the conversation into an investment. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. Fundraising is a full-time business. So you've got to manage your business. You can't forget all about your business. And again, remember what investors are looking for. They don't care just about what you're doing today. Make sure you actually talk to them about your long-term vision and maybe even exit strategy. Again, these last 2 points I'll come back to again later on in the presentation. So as I said, I'm going to be keeping on repeating this, that fundraising is a full-time job. So prepare your team to lose you for a period of time. So think about how the business is going to run without your full attention on it, and that it will normally take 4 to 6 months. Every time I talk to a founder who's done this the first time, even ones that we're investing in, they're always amazed about the time and the amount of work that is required. And I always tell them, if you think it's bad at the seed round, at later rounds, it actually gets a little bit worse. So I think I've covered these bits before. Let's just go back up. So how do you find out who and reach out to investors? Again, as I've said, one of the ways that you can actually do this is look at the companies that in the similar space or similar sector to you, and see who's investing into them. Platforms like E27, Tech in Asia, Deal Street Asia, a lot of them talk about the companies that are raising funds. So look at who's investing in those businesses, and that will give you a good indication. And then it's really important that if you can, you not always can't, but if you can, find out if somebody can introduce you to them. Use LinkedIn, use Facebook. Getting somebody to introduce you to a fund, it massively increases your chance of actually getting a meeting with an investor. So if you look at Cocoon Capital, we receive between 2,000 and 3,000 investment proposals a year, and we do on average about 5 investments a year. We probably meet out of that number. We probably meet about 200 founders. So there's a huge dropout between reaching out to Cocoon and actually being able to get a meeting. If you get if you can get a warm introduction, so if you can get one of our founders to actually make the introduction for Cocoon anyway, and I think it's the same for most founders, it's a guaranteed meeting. If you know Peter from Tuxi or Phi from HIP or one of our other, we've got a couple of other Vietnamese companies, if any of them reach out and say, Michael, you should meet Kim or you should meet Thomas, I don't even read the deck, I just organize a meeting straight away. You can't always do that. So look at what other things that are being done. So a lot of VCs like ourselves, we have office hours. You know, our latest investment in Vietnam actually came through office hours that it was virtual office hours that we held in December, I think it was. Biomed was through that we invested, or Tuxi came through office hours that we actually held in person. So these are things that try and figure out how you can get in front of the investors and make them. If you can't, again, you can still apply online. Don't think you can't, but it obviously helps if you can get an introduction. One of the things that you also need to think about is the cover letter. Again, a lot of time people will focus all of their attention on getting the investor deck right, and then they send a cover email with the deck attached. Again, first impressions count. So probably the most important part of your investment process is either the elevator pitch that you have if you meet somebody, which I'll talk about a bit later, or the cover letter. I hate to say this, but many times, if you don't get the cover letter right, a lot of VCs, a lot of investors won't even open your deck, especially if it is a cold email. So spend time, think what is going to get an investor excited enough to actually open and spend time going through my deck. You know, and I'll talk a little bit more later in terms of what type of information that would be that you need to cover. Also, do not spam email investors. That's a guaranteed way of not getting investors to actually reach out back to you. What that means is the dear sir, and you can obviously tell this is an email, you sent the same email out to 50 or 100 investors. Put the name on it, even customize the deck, saying if you attach a investor deck, say it's for Cocoon Capital, or it's 500 startups, or it's for Phoebe, you just customize it to make, because that will show me as an investor, every interaction I have with you will tell me something about yourself. So it will tell me that if this is how you reach out to me for investment, this is also probably how you reach out to a potential customer. You know, would you ever think about spam emailing a customer and thinking that they're actually going to convert? You know, and quite often when you have meetings with an investor, they'll sometimes quite often say that this sounds really interesting, but it's not for us. Don't think that meetings are just about raising money. Think about, has this fund or has this investor invested in a company that would be really useful for me to actually maybe partner with, or just talk to the founder because maybe they have some learnings, or maybe introduce me to another investor. Never be afraid to actually ask. You know, this is something that I wish I'd known more about when I was an entrepreneur. And it really does, it really does. If you don't ask, you don't get. There's been many times in recent years when I've actually just had, you know, the meeting that I've had has ended in failure. And I've just said, you know, because remember, as a VC, I've got to raise money. And I said, oh, could you introduce me to X or Y? And it's amazing, so many times actually I get something out of that meeting, even though it wasn't what I originally wanted. So when we talk about understanding what investors want, you can see from past experiences that quite often VCs or investors have a preference in terms of how they invest. So for something like Cocoon Capital, we will only invest in equity and we'll only invest in a Singapore holding company. Other VCs are less strict, that they don't have that. They might have, will only invest in debt. So just be aware that when you're talking to an investor, if there's any restrictions, don't put anything within the within your deck that might automatically exclude you. Also, we understand that you're at the early stage, that there's a lot of things that you're telling us that you haven't figured out yet, or that you don't know. Don't try and talk your way out of a question that you don't understand. It's absolutely fine to say, we don't understand that, we can get back to you with that answer. Or part of the reason we're raising this funding is actually to prove or disprove that this will work. And one of the things that you should also think about is follow up with meetings. So often I have a long conversation with a founder and they promise to send me stuff, and I'm sitting there and 2 or 3 days go by and nobody follows up. Or I have a meeting and I'm like, this is really interesting, and then people don't actually follow up and actually chase me for like, is there any further information that I can give them? Or Michael, you promised to make this introduction, but you haven't made it. Absolutely, feel free to follow up with people. There's a polite way of doing it. You say, hey, you promised, I know you're busy, can you actually do this? But again, you've got to understand that VCs like yourself are busy people. A lot of times we say we're going to do something and we forget, but if you chase us on it, we'll definitely do it for you. And I think one of the things is, and this is probably the biggest, when somebody talks to me and asks me, what's the biggest mistake that founders make when they're fundraising? It's this point. You use the wrong language. And I'll explain a little bit about what I mean by this. They always say that a great salesperson knows their audience. And what you've got to understand is that most of the time, when you've been spending a lot of time, probably up until the point you've been talking to investors, talking to customers, and the customers want to know a lot more about your products, about your product development, and how you can help them. What you've got to understand is investors want to know, and their outcome is a different outcome than what your customer wants. So you have to learn to change your pitch, your story, to actually talk to an investor and understand what an investor wants. So whilst the customer wants you to solve their problem, an investor wants to know how by investing in you, they can make a lot of money. So they need to, and the way that they can make money is by seeing how you can make money and how you can solve a problem for your customers. So by doing that, so some of the things that you need to understand is, what is the language? What is the language that an investor speaks? And by that, I'm not talking about, is it Vietnamese, if it's English, but most investors come from a finance background. So numbers is a really important thing to them. So they want to understand, what is the problem that you're solving for your customer? Quite often the pitch starts off with, this is the solution to our customers. And we're like, well, that's great, a solution, but if I can understand the problem, if you can put it in numbers. So with currently, by the way that they run their air conditioning units, they're losing 30%, they're spending an additional 30% on energy that we can actually reduce for them. That's giving me a number, and it's telling me a problem. It's also telling me why a customer will want to buy you, because you're actually either saving them money or making them more money. And then you'll have, if any of you who've talked to investors before, they'll ask you questions around your CAC, your LTV. So CAC is cost of customer acquisition, and lower lifetime value of your thing, and your monthly MRR, which is monthly reoccurring revenue. because they want to know that are you building a scalable business? They want to see what your numbers look like. They want to see what your numbers, not necessarily now, but maybe in 3 years' time, what you're going to actually achieve. And they want to actually understand what your big vision is. A lot of times founders may spend a lot of time telling me where they are today. I'm not investing in a company caring so much about where you are today, but my belief is if I invest in you today, your big vision is going to be the next global business which does this, and we're going to do X. And from that, I can actually see how much, if this is a business that I believe I can make money investing in. So I really care about the future. So just think of that as when you're thinking of pitching to investors, try and think of how an investor would think. So, one of the ways I always say this, go and talk to another entrepreneur and tell them that they've got $50,000 in their bank. You want to pitch to them to see if they will give you that $50,000. And what you'll find is that they'll come up with questions that you probably not thought of because you're more thinking about, your product and the solution rather than in terms of, how is anybody going to make money by investing in this business? So we call this corporate governance 101. I mentioned it earlier, your data room. The data room, literally what we mean by this, and this is something that, this is not just for fundraising, this is actually for running your business. You should have one place where you keep all of the core documentation for your business, be it the business plan, the forecasts, your board meeting minutes if you've got it, all of the CVs of your team, any commercial contracts or any IP. Many people use like Google Drive, Digify, Dropbox are places where you can keep it. And you've got to keep these documents continually up to date. So what do you need to have in your data room? So again, this is just some of the information that I've just talked about. So if you run board meetings, and I know many startups don't, so this is that we pull this together, I think, for any type of business at any stage. But it's corporate governance, board materials, licenses, approval for operations, your financials, management accounts, bank statements, supporting documents. Obviously, a key one for investors, and one they spend a lot of time on, is your competitor analysis. Do a deep dive both on local competitors, but also global competitors. If you can show and clearly be able to define how you differentiate within your market that you're going after from your competitors. So again, incorporation ownership. So shareholding, your shareholding, your cap table, all of these things, any contracts that you have, if you have any, and any product information, including IP and tech architecture. Now, you won't have all of these, but when you do have them, just keep them in one place. Because what will tend to happen is if you talk to an investor and they say, we're really interested, we want to do more due diligence on you, this is all the information they will ask for. So if you can share it with them and you can show that you are prepared, it makes the investors much more confident in the management team that is looking to raise funding from them. So this is something that I think is really important to think about, is around the due diligence. As I said, if you pitch to me and I get really excited about you, I'll ask for all of the early information, and I probably ask, to go a bit more into your strategy in terms of your kind of route to market and customer acquisition strategy. But one of the things that I'm surprised that entrepreneurs don't do more, and I think it's really important for you to do this, is due diligence is a two-way process. I will do a lot of due diligence on you, investors will, but it's really important that you do due diligence on the investors themselves. to make sure, because a lot of times these investors will be your partners, they invest in your business for potentially 7 to 10 years. So you've got to make sure that they're the right people. I always say it's best not to take the money from the wrong people, you know. So you've got to make sure that, you know, is Michael Blakey a good investor to have on my cap table and to work with me to help me be successful? So one of the easiest ways of doing this is actually going to talk to the founders that I've already backed. And this is where it's much easier to do this with VCs than it is with, you know, angel investors, because it's harder to see sometimes what they've invested in the past. And quite often as an angel investor, you know, I remember when I was like this, I would only talk about my successful businesses. I would never really talk about my unsuccessful businesses. So with VCs, you know all of the companies that we've invested in. So go and talk to the founders and make sure you ask them the right question. Do not ask them the question of, is Michael a nice guy? They will probably all say yes, because they don't want to find out that I've got upset with their answer. But you can ask the question in a slightly different way, which is probably going to be more productive to you. They can say, when your company hit a tough time, did Michael support you? Did he roll up his sleeves, or did he stop talking to you and kind of leave you to sink or swim? You know, does he actually read information? How quickly does he respond to your emails for asking for help? Is he too involved in the business? So be more direct with your questions. And the important thing when you're doing due diligence, and it's again a two-way thing, how responsive are we and how responsive are you to questions that we ask? So if I ask a question to a founder and it takes them a week to respond to me, I do get concerned, because obviously they're obviously raising funding because they want to be successful. But if they can't respond to my questions on such an important topic, will you guys respond to customers who reach out to you asking for questions? So make sure that you have a rule that you respond within 24 hours of any questions that come in from investors. It makes them feel that you're on top of things and gives them a lot more confidence. And it's important that we do the same to you as well. So what do you need to do when you're pitching? And as I said, there's three parts to this. There's the elevator pitch, the detailed pitch deck, and the financial forecast for about the next 3 years. So I saw that one, so wait a second. Okay. So with the elevator pitch, the reason it's called the elevator is because, you know, it's used, the summation is that you're walking into a building and you're standing there waiting to up in the lift, and you suddenly meet an investor or even a potential customer, and you get in the lift together, and you've got that time in the lift with them to actually, where you've got a captured audience where you've got to actually sell your business or pitched for investment. So they normally say it should be 60 to 90 seconds that you can explain what you want. So if you're talking to an investor, you've got to think, okay, what does an investor need to hear to want to meet me in person for maybe giving up an hour of their time to discuss? Again, it's not so much around the solution. It's more to do with what is the problem that you're solving? Who are you solving it for? It's talking about why you and if you've got co-founders, your team are the right team to actually deliver it. And the last thing is, what is your big vision? What is it that you're trying to achieve in the long term, and that you're looking to raise money as your first step? I will talk a little bit more about your detailed pitch deck, but again, it's just a build up from your elevator pitch and in your financial forecasts. So let's just talk a little bit about numbers. So you need to do forecasts for 3 years. I know that's very difficult for many of you because you're like, we haven't even started getting revenue yet, and we've got to actually kind of put together something that is going to last for 3 years. As investors, we know that. We fully appreciate. But we just need to see how your thinking is, and it will tell us a lot about you and in terms of where you want to actually take this business. And don't fall into the gap. And again, I'll mention this later. Don't be conservative. Show what you want to achieve. You want the investors to back what you want to do, not you show them what you think investors want to see. I always say, tell me a founder that you've ever met that has ever been conservative. So don't actually ever show me conservative numbers. Show maybe realistic. You can even be aggressive, but don't ever use the word conservative when you're talking to an investor. And if you're raising a seed round, always look to raise money for 18 months. It's really important that, I see some founders come and talk to me, oh, we're raising money for 6 months or maybe 12 months. It's really important that you do it for 18 months. The reason being is that, as we've talked before, you've got to give yourself about 6 months to raise your funds. So if you're only raising for 6 months, that means as soon as you've raised the money, you're not actually working for the business, you're automatically talking to another investor and going through the whole process all over again. And for 12 months, the problem that you have is that if you raise money only for 12 months, it normally doesn't matter how good you are. It's quite often to actually hire a team and start to build out a product. It normally takes you about 3 to 4 months to actually be able to get any traction, actually build a team and get them working all together, which means that you've only got a couple of months before you've actually got to go start fundraising again. And remember, investors make their decision at the first meeting, not at the last. Also, you've got to remember, things never go according to plan. And a lot of what I'm investing into businesses is based on assumptions that you're going to prove or disprove. So by raising enough money for 18 months, it means that after you've raised money from me, you've got 12 months where you can focus on building the business and building the team before you even need to start talking to investors again. It also means that if things take slightly longer than expected because some of your assumptions didn't work out how you planned, or maybe you did a bad hire, you can overcome these because you've got that extra money to play with. Because quite often, if you've raised money for 18 months, you can normally extend that for 24 months. So as we've talked, at the seed stage, most of the numbers that you're going to be presenting are assumptions. And that's a large part of what seed funding is around, is you going to market and either proving or disproving or coming up with new assumptions. So if you want to make the life easier of an investor and to show that you really understand how to build forecasts, make sure you have a separate tab on your forecast where you've got all of your assumptions. So we believe that we'll be able to charge X amount to our customers, or that the sales cycle is going to be, for 3 months, or that our margins are going to be 15%, or that a salesperson will only be able to sell to 5 customers a week. That is something that will help us kind of look, because we see a lot of businesses, we have a lot of knowledge that we can use across. So we will be able to look at those numbers and say very quickly if we think they're reasonable or if they're unreasonable. And it also helps us to see in terms of what resources you need to get to your end goal in terms of the team. So what team do you need to build? What's your marketing requirements? And if you've got hardware, because we do deep tech, so this is more relevant for us, how much it will cost to actually build what you're doing. So VCs, why we want the financial forecast is one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of founders make when they're fundraising is they raise the wrong amount of money, because quite often their assumptions are wrong. So in the short term, which is the next 12 to 18 months, we can look at your assumptions and we can say, yes, you might not need to raise that much money, or you actually might need to raise more money. It's important for us, as it's important to you, that when we finance the business, we give you the right amount of money to be successful. We don't want to be investing in your business. And obviously you don't want to be going out, raising the wrong amount of money and potentially running out of funds before you've actually achieved enough traction to raise your next round of funding. So it's in both our interests to make sure we get this number right. And for many of you, it might be your first time. So again, this is where VCs can bring value even before they've invested into your business. And the reason we look at the 3-year is we want to actually assess how big a vision do you have? How aggressive do you want to be? You know, for most companies, when they come and pitch to me, they say, talk about the market opportunity being, you know, this multi-billion opportunity and that their customers have this big pain point. Yet they tell me in 3 years' time, they're going to be doing, you know, 800,000 of revenue. And it doesn't make sense. You know, for me as an investor, what you've got to understand is I actually turn down a lot of good companies, which I know are going to be good companies. But VCs are looking for the outliers. They're looking for the companies that can grow into and give superior returns than what you can do investing in safe businesses. And that's why people give people like me money and what VCs are looking for. So you've got to understand that quite often if you're looking to build potentially a lifestyle business, maybe raising money and pitching to VCs isn't where you want to go. Maybe it should be more friends and family or even angel investors. And coming back to the point that I made earlier, be realistic and don't talk about and don't try and be conservative with your numbers. Because also you've got to remember is VCs and investors always assume that you're aggressive with your numbers, no matter what you say. So we will start, you know, or maybe we'll reduce your sales by 50%. What does that look like? So just be aware that, you know, show us your vision that if you achieved, you would be happy and would think this is, I've done what I've wanted to do. This is a very, very sensitive topic to founders. I'm just checking the time. How am I doing on time, by the way? How much longer do I have?
Well, I think we still can make it to 4. Like we
So
still have 30 minutes. Yeah, 30 minutes left.
30 minutes. Okay. Are we doing Q&A or do I just talk the whole time?
Yeah, we planned that we would have like 15 minutes left to doing the Q&A.
Okay, so talk for another like 20 minutes.
But you can keep it longer.
I can keep it longer. Okay, I just want to make sure I don't. I've been told that I can talk for England on this subject, so I just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
Okay, that is good. I will keep on talking as long as people are finding this useful. I will do that. Okay. So one of the big frictions, I would call it, between investors and entrepreneurs always comes around the valuation question. How much is your company worth? And I find that and I don't think this will surprise any of you, quite often founders have a much higher valuation expectation than an investor. So I'm going to take this point from an investor's point of view, which I would assume you're saying, so you can always take it with a pinch of salt. But the important thing is don't get too caught up in the valuation question. The expectation that you should, because there is no way that anybody can value an early stage business. Quite often, if you've just got an idea, even if you've got a few customers, the business is probably only worth maybe 10, 20, maybe $50,000 to $60,000, but you might be looking to raise, you know, $500,000. I know that I've got to overpay for the business because the important thing is the founders and that you are incentivized to build the business and work the long hours and make the personal sacrifices to make these companies successful. So if you're looking to raise 18 months of runway for your business, the expectation that you should have is that you're going to be giving up between 15 and 30% of your business, if you're doing an equity, for that amount of money. And the model that I use, and again, it's very much finger in the air. I've been doing this for 21 years, and I've never come across a decent model that can actually help value a business. And God, don't ever come to an early stage investor and say, I've done a discounted cash flow, and this is what I think my business is worth, because that investor will run a mile. But the difference, what is the difference between giving up 15 and 30% of your business? I think the obvious one is competition. So if there's a lot of investors looking to invest in your business, you can probably get away with maybe only giving up 15% of your business. But if you take that equation out, if you take that question out and saying, how should I think of how much money am I probably going to have to give up? There's three things that you've got to look at. Is how experienced are you as a management team? Look at what traction have you achieved to date, and how clearly defined, or how have I proven my problem statement? Now, if you're a very young and inexperienced management team and you've got no traction, and a lot of what you're trying to show is more around, is based on theory, then you're probably going to find that you'll be giving up closer to 30%. I normally say 30% is very aggressive, but you should never, ever give up more than 30%. Maybe at that stage, you're looking at maybe giving away about 25%. But if you're the opposite, so if you're a very experienced team who've got a number of customers already, and you've kind of proven that your problem statement is in fact true, then you'll probably end up giving away more like 15% of the business. But one of the things that you've got to think is time is money. If you want to kind of shorten the time frame it takes to raise funding, put a better deal on the table for the investors. I've seen companies that have come to me and they said, oh, we want a 3 million valuation. I'm like, that's too high for me for where I believe that you are. And they'll come back a year, sometimes 18 months later, and said, well, we got the valuation of 3 million. And I'm like, yeah, but it took you 18 months to actually get the money. Is that the best use of your time to being talking to thousands of investors to raise the money at that valuation? Or you could have raised the money in a couple of months, and then you could have actually really started the scaling and focusing on the business going forward. It's a question. There isn't a right answer to that. It is a question for you as founders to make, is do you want to spend time fundraising, or do you want to spend time building a business? And as a founding team, you've got to actually feel comfortable with whatever deal you end up making. So coming back to like the pitch deck, which is the big document that you spend a lot of time putting together and what you really want to actually deliver. So going back to the elevator pitch again, this is like 60 to 90 seconds. It's the problem, the team, the opportunity, the traction, and the vision. Those are the core things that you need to discuss. Again, one of the big mistakes that I find from a lot of founders is that you end up wanting to talk about your solution. And I'd go into this point, and I'll repeat it over and over again because it's just so important. If you talk to any investor, and this can be a seed investor, this can be a Series B investor, 80% of their investment decision is going to be based on the team and what the team brings, because that's what differentiates you from many of the other businesses, because very rarely will you be doing something that I've never heard of before. So telling me, oh, my name is Jack and I used to work at Google, doesn't really tell me much about you as the individual and what makes you special, because you could have held any role at Google. But if you said, you know, my name is Jack, I worked for 5 years at Google and I helped build their team from 0 to 20, and I helped generate, 50 million of sales, that tells me something about you. Or if you say, I worked in this industry that I'm trying to disrupt for 5 years, and I saw that this is how I came up with this problem statement, because I saw it personally myself, and I figured out this is the best way of solving it. It tells me something about you as the individual, and also helps personalize the story. So when you think about it, try and make the team, like when you're talking about individuals, why are they relevant to the business that you're building? And when you're talking about the team, you don't have to tell me every person that is working for the business. It's either yourself, just yourself, or it could be yourself or your co-founder, if you think that they bring something important that will get an investor excited. So this is the normal way